The chest or your pecs can be an incredibly stubborn muscle when it comes to growth. And if you were not blessed with the best chest genetics, you might find it to be an eternal struggle. I myself did. So I had to go out and find every single bit of information that I could about the pecs and then dial in the application over time so that it would finally start to grow. So this video is my tribute to the community, sharing everything that I've learned along the way so you can hopefully shortcut yourself through your breast-related struggles. In this video, we're going to cover the anatomy of the chest, biomechanics, key form principles that apply to basically every chest exercise, and then at the end, I'm going to give you a handful of exercises that I think, when paired, give you a complete and well-rounded growth stimulus. My name's Amir Barber, I'm a chemical engineer and fitness educator, and this is the Chest Masterclass. So let's roll right into the anatomy. And this is the first foundational layer you need to understand about any muscle before having a nuanced conversation about its training. And real quick, before we discuss the anatomy of the chest, let's just talk about muscles in general. Now, what muscle fibers do is they create bone-to-bone pull. Okay, so they will attach at one bone and then at another bone, and when they contract, they pull those 2 points closer together. Now, these attachment points are known as the origin and the insertion. And in the case of the pectoralis, all pec fibers insert onto the humerus or the upper arm bone, so they all converge to the same spot. But their origins fan out based on which muscle fibers you're looking at. Now, anatomically, there are two main heads of the pectoralis. We have the clavicular head, which originates along the clavicle or your collarbone. Then we have the sternocostal head, which originates along your sternum and your ribs. Now, this region, this head, makes up the vast majority of your chest fibers. And you have some that attach to the sternum, and then some that attach along your rib cage. And this is the more costal region. Each of these regions, considered in isolation, are best suited to pull your upper arm bone in a certain direction. For example, if we were to look at one muscle fiber of the clavicular pec, it would want to pull your arm up and across, origin to insertion. Similarly, if we were to look at one of the more sternal fibers, it wants to pull your arm straight across. And lastly, if we were to look at the more costal pec, it would want to pull your arm down and across. Now, in practice, these fibers don't contract individually, they work together. Let's look at me driving my arm straight across my body, which is very similar to the arm path of a flat press or fly. Now, while the sternal fibers are best suited for pulling the arm across like this, the clavicular head and the costal region are still helping out. Let's ignore the sternal fibers for a sec and just look at the lines of force created by the clavicular head and the costal pecs. And what you'll see is that one pulls up and across, the other pulls down and across, but when you combine these forces, the up and the down cancel out, and the net force is across. And this is why flat pressing and flat flies train the entire chest effectively, so we might not need as much variety as we think. However, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do any specialization work. So while the pectoralis is one large muscle that shares an insertion point, its different origins give it different lines of pull, which is why angles matter a lot when it comes to training, which we will get into. So now that we've covered the anatomy and have an understanding that the pec fibers essentially just pull your upper arm bone and can pull it in different directions, now we can talk about how to best hit those muscle fibers. Now, when it comes to training the chest, there are two main categories of movements that you should spend almost all of your energy focusing on, and that's pressing and flies. But for the sake of being thorough, pullovers that have resistance in this lengthened position can be good to train the costal pec, and then front raises can be good to train the clavicular head of the pec. However, I think for 99% of people, they should be focusing on the meat and potatoes, presses and flies. And that's why we'll be talking about them at length. Presses are your more compound movements, things like a barbell bench, dumbbell bench, machine chest press, things of that nature. And this type of movement pattern involves not just the pecs, but also the front delts and the triceps. Then you have flies, which are a little bit more isolated in nature because your triceps are taken out of the equation and that shifts workload to the chest. Now, the biceps are still involved to a small extent, as well as your front delts. But for the record, Presses and flies, I don't think I said anything groundbreaking here. Most people already understand this. The real magic, the real level up is in how you do these movements. When it comes to form, there are global principles that apply to both pressing and flying. So we're going to cover these global ones first, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty for pressing and flying. The first one I want to talk about is how much you should arch or tilt your rib cage up. And the answer is you do want a slight arch in your back. This is a good thing, as it places the majority of the pec fibers in a position where they have better leverage to perform the movement pattern. Now, it doesn't need to be excessive, and it should be noted that the more you tilt your rib cage up, if you go completely overboard with it, then you are going to be biasing your lower chest, which essentially means that you're going to be doing less upper chest and less mid chest. Here's the key thing. Once you've set that slight arch in the beginning of the set, your rib cage should be locked in stone for the rest of the set. If your sternum angle changes slightly, yes, you're changing which fibers are getting worked the most, but the much larger mistake is that people, when they get to the top of the rep, they'll cave completely, which places the front delt in a much better position to finish the movement and can be a little bit uncomfortable on the shoulders. So once you get that slight arch, lock it in for the set and keep it consistent. The second core principle is range of motion. Now, the pecs seem to grow best through the mid-range and the lengthened range, which means getting a stretch is important. However, the degree of that stretch should be within your active range of motion. And here's what I mean by active range of motion. Let's just say this is about how wide you would grab a barbell to perform a barbell bench press. And forget about the barbell. You're doing exactly what I'm doing right now. Okay? If I were to actively contract my back muscles and pull back as far as I can, this is the end of my active range, where my body can take itself on its own. So here's the thing. When you are doing a press or a fly and you have actual load in your hand, it can push you deeper than your actual end range. And this extra range of motion does not cause more growth. It just places more stress on your joints and connective tissues while limiting how much load you can use. So whether it's a press or a fly, start by taking your normal grip width. Let's say if we're doing a fly and this is about how much elbow bend I would have, I'm going to get in this position and then actively contract back as far as I can. I'm going to take a look and be like, okay, that's my end range. So we want to think of this as kind of like a Goldilocks zone, right? If we stop too early, I stop my fly right here, then we're missing out on all this benefit through the range. Too cold, all right? But if we go too deep beyond our active range of motion, too hot. But if we stop at the end of our active range, just right. And keep in mind, this is individual specific based on people's joint structure and mobility, which is why generic advice like the bar should touch your chest isn't really valid. Now we can roll into talking about press specific advice. The first thing we're going to discuss is elbow position. How much should you tuck your elbows? And this does have implications as to which fibers will get trained best. But the first thing to keep in mind is where is comfortable for you. Now, what most people will find is this high elbow position, let's call this 90 degrees up here, can have a lot of, we'll just call it pinchy stuff going on in their GH joint, in their glenohumeral joint, in their shoulder joint. Why can't I use simple words? Okay, but tucking a little bit alleviates that. So I like to think of this as finding your slot. Okay, realistically, anywhere from, again, if we're calling this 90, anywhere from like 45 to like 70 usually ends up being a really good spot for most people when they're pressing. But if you tuck any closer than 45 degrees, your front delts and your triceps are going to be involved a lot more. There's also an argument to be made that the clavicular head of your pec can also have more activation, but I'll leave it at that. But the most important thing is simple. Where do you feel comfortable and where do you feel strong? The next thing we need to talk about is scapula mechanics. What should you be doing with your shoulder blades when you're pressing? And this one can be a bit confusing because there's a lot of conflicting information out there, and hopefully I can simplify it for you. On the negative, when you are going down, you want to think about rowing into the bottom of the movement and pinching your shoulder blades together at the bottom. Then when you go into the positive, you want to be forceful, again, with your rib cage locked in stone. You want to be forceful, but let your shoulder blades go where they want to go. There's going to be slight movement of the shoulder blades when you're pressing, nothing too crazy, but you shouldn't be hyper focused on keeping them pinned down and back. All right, now let's discuss fly specific advice. All right, specifically elbow position. So at the bottom of a fly, you want a slight degree of elbow bend. The reason being is that if you straighten your arm, you might feel some sharp, weird sensation in your shoulder, and that's actually your biceps tendon being fully stretched and kind of stressed. So to give slack to the biceps tendon, we just bend our elbow a little bit, and then we're great. And also, kind of a double whammy, when you bend your elbow a little bit, if you pay attention to your arm position, the upper arm position, it goes back a little bit more, which if you remember, the pec attaches to the upper arm. It doesn't really care where your hand is, so you get a bit more range of motion at the shoulder joint, which means the pec gets a little bit more stretch. So that's what we do at the bottom of a fly, but as we come up, we want to actually straighten our arm and think about smashing the inside of the biceps into your chest. Okay, and this is a big mistake that a lot of people make on flies. When they are doing them, they're just thinking about bringing their hands together. But remember, your chest doesn't attach to your hand, it cares where your upper arm is. So if we think about smashing our biceps into our chest or bringing our elbows together, we pick up a considerable amount of the range of motion. Let's say we're only moving through maybe 100-ish degrees of range of motion. You can pick up an extra 15, 20, 30, I don't know, pull out your protractors, but it's sizable. And it's also pretty much the only time you're training the chest in its fully shortened range, because all the pressing that we're doing, for the most part, biases the mid and lengthened range. Now let's talk about your shoulder blades in a fly, which is different from a press. So like we talked about, in a press, maybe they move a little bit, but not that much. But in the case of a fly, they do move around. Your scapula will slide around your rib cage in order to get that full contraction. So the advice is largely the same. We want to think about rowing into the bottom of the movement, and then we want to be forceful and let our shoulder blades go where they want at the top. Now, that doesn't mean to punch forward and get all weird, and your torso should remain locked in stone, right? And if you do that, then you will make this a productive motion. Otherwise, if you're just like, oh, let them go where they want to go, then it may not be a helpful piece of advice. So before we talk about exercise selection, which we're going to get into, I want to say the how is so much more important than the what. So the what being like, do this press and this press and this fly, like this type, okay? How you do them is so much more important. So that last part of the video, apply that to every chest motion that you're doing, and you will get way better results with whatever you're doing. That being said, let's roll into exercise selection. These are 3 of my favorite exercises that I think when paired together give you a well-rounded growth stimulus. The first up is the converging chest press machine. Now this is a meat and potato exercise in my book. It's super easy to set up, super stable, and offers up a unique resistance profile that really isn't achieved with any other pressing movements. So first, it's very stable. And generally speaking, the more stable a movement is, the more you remove that coordination demand, the more output you can get from the target musculature. So instead of worrying about balancing, you can worry about fully recruiting the chest, and that's how your brain views it. Also, most of these machines are pin loaded or plate loaded, which makes setup relatively easy, and that's something to be taken into account when you're actually programming. How practical is it? But perhaps the most important part is the actual path of the handles, the fact that these handles are converging. And what this means is that the handles don't just go straight forward and back, they actually go on a converging path. They come closer to one another at the top. And this is really important from a physics standpoint, as it offers up a unique resistance profile. Now, in a standard dumbbell or a barbell press, when you get to the top of the rep, there is little to no tension on the chest because the line of force from gravity is pushing straight into your arm, right? So your chest doesn't really have to do anything. But in a converging chest press, where the path is along this range of motion, this is the line of force. So at the top here, there's a component of that force trying to pull your arm outwards, and your chest has to contract inwards in order to stop that from happening. So the end result is that your chest is loaded through the full range of motion. Now, if your gym doesn't have a converging chest press, or it just never feels right and it's just kind of a piece of crap, because unfortunately, not all machines are created equally. If that's the case, then you can opt for a Smith machine press, in which you still get the benefit of a very stable movement pattern along a fixed path that allows you to maximize motor unit recruitment and not have to worry too much about instability. The main takeaway here is to have one stable pressing movement in your routine. Next up is the 30-degree dumbbell incline press, right? So the bench is set to about 30 degrees, and then your arm path is set to about 45 degrees. Now, both of these things, the degree of incline and tucking your elbows, make for a really nice stimulus to the clavicular head of the pec, or your upper chest, which we may not have fully hit in that last movement. And dumbbells are really good for this because your grip isn't fixed. Let's say in a barbell, you can tuck slightly, right? But not that much. But for dumbbells, you can put your hands wherever you want and you'll feel comfortable. So it allows you to tuck to that 45-degree angle really well. Another benefit of dumbbells is that they create a balanced stimulus between both sides of the chest. So in a machine chest press, especially a very stable one, you can maybe push with one arm more than the other without really noticing it. The machine and its stability can mask those asymmetries. However, with dumbbells, you cannot let that slide or you'll be off balance, okay? So it essentially forces you to push evenly, which is a win long term. Now, is there a trade-off with stability and maybe perhaps a tiny bit of motor unit recruitment? Sure, but that's okay and that's acceptable. Now the last exercise, and we're putting the sauce on this one, is the roller chest fly. No, I did not come up with it. Yes, thank you, Joe Bennett. That's where I learned this exercise from. But it is hands down my favorite chest fly variation for several different reasons. So this is essentially a seated cable fly with a foam roller placed behind your back. And let's break down why this is so awesome. Okay, first thing to discuss is just doing this seated in the first place versus standing. If you've ever done a standing cable crossover, you will very quickly realize that you will become balance and stability limited versus actual chest output limited. Like if you're getting remotely strong at that movement, you're gonna have to like step forward and lean forward and play this whole balancing act, which is gonna take away from how much load you can actually deliver to the chest. But if you sit down and you have that back pad pushing into you, right? Because the cables are trying to pull you backwards. If you have something anchoring you there, then you can just blast the chest. Then let's talk about the obvious thing, the roller itself. Now, when you're using the roller, if you have one of the ones that are kind of sliced vertically in half, so it's like half of a roller, then that's perfect. And if you don't have one of those, a normal foam roller works just fine. That's what I use a lot of the time. And you really want to strap it in. You could tie a resistance band around it, or if you have a strap, you can straight up just strap it. In any case, you just want it so that it's not shifting around during your set. But the reason that the roller is so advantageous is because, like we talked about earlier, in a chest fly motion, you want freedom for the scapula to move around your rib cage to get that full contraction, right? So if you were to just do them on a normal seated back pad, right? Because that back pad's pushing into you, it kind of limits the freedom of the scapula to move. No, it's not disastrous, right? No, it's not going to be a huge, huge difference, right? But when you have the roller, it allows your scapula to move a little bit more freely, okay? So that's one thing, right? And also, when we're rowing into the bottom of the movement, like we talked about for flies, your scapula just feel really nice and they wrap around that roller. And just the sensation you get from these is just tremendously awesome. I don't have words. I have not ran across a single person that I've showed this variation to that has not instantly been like, oh, that was freaking awesome. Okay, now key caveat here. Do not go and put a roller behind a normal chest fly machine, because on a normal chest fly machine, your shoulders are aligned with the pivots above you. And if you put something behind you, you are taking your shoulder out of alignment with the pivots, which is no bueno. So only do these on a cable. So yes, I understand that there's a little bit of an excessive setup thing going on. You got to drag a bench over and strap a roller to it. But if I didn't think it was worth it, I wouldn't do it. This is personally one of them that I'm all on board with taking a few extra minutes to set up. That being said, a normal pec deck, if you're just not gonna do this or you don't have the cables or whatever, a normal pec deck will get you most of the way there. Don't get hung up on this. This is just a little saucy one that just feels so good. Now let's talk about why I chose these 3 movements and why they're complementary. And at its core, it's because each does something that's different from the other. Right? So first up with the converging chest press, it's a very stable movement pattern that trains the pecs through the lengthened, mid, and shortened range. So it trains it through its entire range. Okay? Now it might slightly bias the mid to lower pec because we are tilting up a little bit as we're doing it, but that's okay because our next exercise was the incline dumbbell press with our elbows tucked a little bit. So that will take care of the upper chest stimulus. And then lastly, we're gonna do a fly to take the triceps out of the equation and bias or isolate the chest a little bit more. You can't actually isolate anything, but overall to just give it a different stimulus and really challenge it through its fully shortened range. Okay, so just the main thing here is you can swap out variations. You can do, an incline barbell or an incline converging press. Those exist, right? But the main thing to keep in mind is that you want to avoid exercise redundancy. You do not want to be doing a flat barbell bench, then a flat dumbbell press, and then, a flat machine press, right? Because it's redundant. It trains the chest through very, very similar functions. But overall, I truly believe that if you choose those 3 movements, and they do not have to be performed on the same day. In fact, I probably recommend spreading out the presses across different days in your program. Here's the overarching lesson. Once your exercise selection makes sense and isn't like super redundant, do what you want, okay? But it's so much more about how you perform these movements. So that, my friends, is the Chest Masterclass, and I sincerely hope it helps you build a gigantic set of milkers. All right, if you have any questions, drop them down below in the comments. Until next time, peace.